Welcome to Film Flicks Recaps. We will explain an American drama film, Gran Torino. The movie opens with Walt Kowalski, a retired auto worker and Korean War veteran, accepting condolences from his friends for his deceased wife, Dorothy, during her burial. Ashley's less than modest attire infuriates Walt, who glares at her because he thinks it's inappropriate. Walt's middle-aged sons talk about how trying to impress their father is impossible because he always seems to be dissatisfied. It turns out that Walt does not get along well with his family and will be alone himself now that his wife, to whom he was married for 50 years, has passed away. Many visitors arrive at Walt's home following the funeral. Walt resides in Highland Park, which used to be home to white working-class families. However, gangsters and low-income Southeast Asian immigrants now reside in the area, including the Vanglore family, Walt's neighbors. Walt is enraged to see his neighbors outside and enters his garage only to see Ashley smoking a cigarette. When Ashley recognizes him, she is astonished to see him and diverts his attention by asking him about his vintage car. Walt becomes even more irate and leaves the garage when she raises the subject of who will inherit his possessions, including his automobile and an antique sofa, once he passes away. Walt refuses the teenager from the family of the next-door neighbor when he arrives at the house and asks for jumper wires even though he did possess them, which was revealed later on in the movie. Father Janovich, the priest of Walt's late wife, tries to comfort him by saying that Dorothy intended for him to confess one day. Walt, on the other hand, dismisses the notion, stating that the father is simply a young, inexperienced boy. Following the service, everyone including Walt's son leaves. Walt is dismayed to see them traveling in a Japanese vehicle as he used to work for the Ford Corporation and he wanted him to drive an American car. Walt is irritated to see the Vanglore family next door celebrating the birth of a new child and describes them as barbarians after seeing them slaughtering a chicken. Later, Father Janovich shows up to meet Walt once more, but Walt dismisses him once more by insulting him. The action shifts to Tao Vanglore, a boy who lives next door, being harassed by several goons on the street. Spider, a member of Tao's cousin's gang, arrives just in time to rescue him from the bullies. They invite Tao to get in the car, but Tao declines and continues to lazily wander. Spider and his crew soon show up at Tao's residence and force him to join the gang. Tao agrees since he has no other option. The gang members urge Tao to break into his neighbor Walt's garage and take his 1972 Gran Torino, which has a Cobra jet engine. The group then visits Walt's prized automobile and becomes fixated on it. Father Janovich makes another appearance at night while Walt is hanging out with his friends in a pub because he had previously made a commitment to Dorothy to take good care of Walt. Walt is once more compelled to make a confession by him. Janovich is chastised by Walt for not understanding the true meaning of life and death. He believes the father only has bookish knowledge unlike himself. That is because he served in Korea for 3 years. Walt discovers Tao trying to steal his prized Gran Torino later that evening. Walt picks up his gun in a fit of rage, loads it, and walks to his garage. There he catches Tao red-handed. He has Tao in his crosshairs, but just as he is ready to seize him, Tao escapes. The gang invites Tao to get in the car so they may flee despite his failure, but Tao rejects their offer. The following morning, Walt gets a call from his selfish older son Mitch asking for a favor, but Walt cuts him off. Spider and his gang show up at Tao's house late at night when Tao and his sister Sue are there. Spider coerces Tao to accompany him as they make another attempt to steal Walt's vehicle. Tao's family, however, puts up a fight and makes a scene outside the house by preventing Spider from removing Tao. Thankfully, Walt escapes his home in time and uses his rifle to chase Spider and his gang away, gaining the respect of the Vanglore family in the process. The following morning, the Vanglore family heaps of food and flowers upon Walt's porch as a token of their appreciation. Walt tosses everything in the trash because he finds it offensive. When Walt saves Tao, he apologizes to Walt for his behavior, and he then begs his neighbors to stop sending him gifts. However, Walt rejects his expression of remorse and issues a warning to keep away from his land. After learning that there had been difficulty in the area earlier, Father Janovich shows up to meet Walt in the afternoon. Walt responds that he has learnt throughout the war to react to issues promptly rather than waiting for assistance from others when the man asks him why he didn't call the police. Walt is informed by Janovich that he is no longer in Korea and that, to find salvation, he must free himself from the agony of war. Walt now recognizes the value of Janovich's ideas, but he also goes on to add that the actual reason bothering him was the acts done without and beyond orders of his superiors. Later, 3 criminals approach Sue as she walks down the street with her companion Trey and harasses her. By pointing his rifle at the criminals while passing by in his truck, Walt manages to protect Sue from the attackers. Walt advises Sue to avoid hanging out with her timid friend Trey and make friends from her Asian neighborhood as they make their way back home. When Sue reveals to him that her family moved to the Midwest as a result of the Vietnam War's aftermath, the two of them get along well. Walt observes Tao helping an elderly woman with her groceries later on while he is relaxing on his veranda. On Walt's birthday, Mitch and his wife Karen pay a visit to his home with a gift for Walt and convince him to move to a community center to get away from his loneliness. They are ejected from Walt's home as he erupts in a fit of rage. Mitch and Karen regret visiting Walt and storm out of the house in a huff. Walt returns to the porch later and has a beer with Daisy by himself. Sue finds him alone and extends an invitation to her home for a barbecue. Walt is initially hesitant to go, but after a while, he concludes that it is preferable to drink a beer with strangers than by himself. Walt isn't exactly welcomed at the Vanglores' home by the visitors, notably Sue's grandma, who despises Walt because of his critical character. Walt is ecstatic to see the delectable cuisine when Sue brings him to the buffet table. But when a man who is the shaman of the Lore family keeps staring at him non-stop, he feels strange. The shaman approaches Walt a short while later and informs him that everyone dislikes him because he has strong opinions. Additionally, he admits that Walt did a mistake in his previous life, which he is unhappy about, which is why he is not at peace. Walt suddenly feels overpowered and has a bloody coughing fit. He hurries to the bathroom while attempting to conceal it from Sue. Walt lies to Sue when she queries him about the blood and the two return to the party where Walt has a good time. Sue then leads him to the cellar where he interacts with a girl named Yua. The encounter with Tao, who is sitting by himself in a remote location, lets him realize that Yua likes him. Walt counsels him on dating and warns him against letting any random guys approach Yua. After that, Walt continues to get flowers and his favorite chicken dumplings from the Hmong people. Tao's mother eventually concludes that Walt should hire Tao as a punishment for attempting to steal his automobile. Sue insisted that Walt let Tao stay on his property, and eventually he complied. The following day and on, Tao shows up to work for Walt, but instead of having him work for himself, Walt wants him to mend confusing things for the neighborhood. Walt once more has a bloody coughing fit on Tao's last day at work, so he chooses to give Tao the day off. When he goes to see his doctor, he is disappointed to learn that his trusted physician retired 3 years prior. Walt calls his son Mitch to share his unfavorable medical results after completing all of his exams. Before he could tell him, though, Mitch says that he is now busy. Walt makes the decision not to worry him and decides not to tell his family. Walt notices Spider's crew driving by the street the following day. Walt just happens to be smoking while standing on his porch. To frighten the goons away, he goes into his jacket pocket and abruptly brings his hand out as if he were pulling a gun. Walt leads Tao into his garage when Tao returns to his house later to work, where he is shocked to see hundreds of equipment. Walt provides Tao with 3 fundamental tools that can be used by any man to fix anything when he says that he can never have enough tools. Walt then coughs up blood once more, which worries Tao. Walt, however, diverts Tao's attention by asking him about Spider's gang's purpose. Walt is shocked and laughs it off when Tao says they want his Gran Torino. Walt and Tao quickly grow to respect one another. Tao doesn't mind Walt making fun of him for being a coward, though. Sue visits Walt's home later and expresses her gratitude for being a kind man and a role model for Tao. Walt is teaching Tao how to garden when Tao asks him to stop smoking because it is bad for his health. Walt changes the subject to Tao and advises him to attend school to learn. Walt advises Tao to obtain a job when he says he lacks the resources to continue his education. To help Tao grow a little more as a man, he also offers him some social skills advice and invites him out on a date. Later, Walt begs Martin to man up Tao while they are in his friend Martin's barbershop. Martin and Walt give Tao some tips before asking him to enter the store acting like a true man. Then, Walt helps Tao secure employment in the construction industry by accompanying him to Tim's construction site. In front of Tim, Tao puts on a brave face and impresses him enough to get a job. Walt makes a stop at a store on the way back home to pick up some supplies for Tao's construction project. Later, Spider's crew harasses Tao more and assaults him as he returns home from work. Walt asks Tao for Spider's address when he notices his battered face, but Tao declines to give it to him. Walt finds Spider's home, though, and gives one of his gang members a nasty beating as a warning. Walt is thrilled to learn that Tao has asked Yua out during a later barbecue with the Vanglore family. He offers to lend Tao his Gran Torino for the date night out of kindness. Later, Tao is hurt when Spider's gang starts shooting at the Vanglore family's home late at night. Walt rushes over to see whether everyone is okay. Fortunately, nobody was wounded, but Sue has gone missing. When Sue finally gets home, everyone is astonished to see that she has bruises. Walt feels heartbroken and enraged. When he gets back home, he can't stop pounding about to let his rage out. Father Janovich meets Walt that evening and agrees with his plan to exact revenge on the attackers because Sue and her family chose not to report the crimes. The following day, Tao shows up at Walt's home and requests his assistance in exacting retribution against the gang. Walt tells him to cool off and come back later that day after seeing his wrath. Walt then spends the rest of the day alone. He mows the lawn, gets a new suit made to fit his body type, gets a haircut and shave, and then visits Father Janovich to confess. Later on that day, Tao goes back to Walt as requested. He receives his silver star from Walt in his basement, where they are. Walt gave it to him after the Korean War. Tao questions him as to how many men has he murdered in Korea. Walt confesses to having murdered at least 13 guys. Walt explains that he is still troubled by the recollection of murdering enemy soldiers and does not want Tao to feel bad after killing someone when Tao insists on being let out while he is locked in the basement. Walt gives Daisy to Tao's grandmother before leaving for the gang's house and tells Sue he's got the keys, so she can let Tao out later. To prevent violence, Father Janovich and the police are waiting outside Spider's home. However, because there has been calm since the morning, the police depart, taking Janovich with them. Walt shows up at the gang's house in the meantime. The neighbors look on as the gang members point their rifles at Walt. Walt scolds Spider for hitting his cousin before lighting up a cigarette. He then abruptly pulls his hand out of his jacket pocket as if he were pulling a revolver. Walt is fatally shot by the gang members after they become awake. Walt reveals his lighter as his hand opens. It turns out that he was unarmed and gave his life to save Sue and Tao. He was aware that he couldn't eliminate every gang member. So, as an alternative, he gave his life to put them in prison for his murder. Sue and Tao quickly arrive at the site in Walt's Gran Torino and are horrified to discover Walt's body being transported on a stretcher. Walt was slain even though he was unarmed, and a police officer lets them know that the gang members are being detained for murder because the neighbors saw the crime take place. Later, Walt's burial is held in the church by Father Janovich, who is joined by his sons and people from the Hmong neighborhood. Following the funeral, Walt's family excitedly awaits the reading of Walt's will in an effort to gain ownership of his belongings. To their amazement, Walt instead donates his house to the church and permits Tao to keep his Gran Torino as long as he doesn't add any ridiculous flames to it. Tao and Daisy are shown in the movie driving the Gran Torino. Tell us what you liked most about the film in the comment section. Also, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. See you at the next one.